Good morning, everybody. Let me welcome you to what we're calling Enabling the Future as part of marking Bob's 70th birthday. We've been urging everybody to get seated up front because we have a few visual treats for you, and the full effect is best appreciated from the front rows. We heard yesterday from many of Bob's colleagues and collaborators from Wisconsin and UCLA, and of the many wonderful things that were said. I remember George mentioning how he read about the most recent thing, the Brain Initiative in the New York Times. And last night when I went home, I found this Carmel Valley Times in my driveway. And I opened up Carmel Valley Times, and in section B, front page, is all about our famous Del Mar resident, Bob Conn, and what he did. So when you get into not only the New York Times, but Carmel Valley Times, you know. Now you're in the big times. So we were delighted that our Chancellor is able to join us today. So without further ado, Pradeep Khosla, Chancellor of UCSD.
Thank you, Ramesh, and welcome everybody. And before I say anything, happy birthday, Bob. I know we are a few months late, but remember, we are a university, and we have our own time scale, and we are part of the UC system, which has still another time scale. So I hope you'll forgive us for being just a few months late. At least we remembered instead of forgetting, right? Which, as a university, we are capable of doing. Hopefully not going further. It's a great honor to be here, and as you all know, and you know better than I do, I first met Bob after I got here, believe it or not. And now you're wondering, what is he going to say about Bob? Because he never saw Bob, but I'll tell you a little bit in a second. And as you know, Bob served as the dean for 9 years. And during that time, this School of Engineering went from something like 44 or 45 to like number 11. And that was an amazing rise. I have not seen any school in the country go up that fast in a period of less than 10 years. And during that time, I was the head of electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon. And Bob, to me, was a star, and I felt like an astrophysicist, where I never saw the star, I could not see the star, but I felt the gravitational field bending. And the way this gravitational field was bending is these particles that were supposed to come towards me were being attracted on this other side called UC San Diego. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that there really was this star out there, a dean who was moving faster than light, or nearly, close to like 0.98, something like that. And during that time, I can tell you personally that Bob and I would compete like on the other, without knowing each other. And Bob would win slightly more often than I would. And if you look at the young people or who are right now just about senior people right now, and who are really the foundation of going into the future, you can actually thank Bob for building that foundation. He had, I could tell, really good taste. And that was a time when Carnegie Mellon could not stand losing to UC San Diego. But with that said, now that I'm here as a chancellor, I am so glad that Carnegie Mellon lost to UC San Diego because now I get to preside over the superstars that Bob has hired. Thank you, Bob, for it was an amazing 10-year ride, and even though at that time I felt bad, looking back, I feel good right now. Bob, as you know, after he left here, became the president of Cowhey Foundation. And in that role, I think he's been a leader in the country, not just in Del Mar or in... he's been a leader in the country, even though it's only the Del Mar Times that quotes you. No, I'm just kidding. In defining what the future of science is and what it should be. And were it not for Bob's initiative, we would not have the Cowhey Brain and Mind Institute out here. And again, were it not for his initiative and prodding from the side, and also from the inside, because Bob's now both an outsider and an insider, and that's like a dangerous combination. So when I talk to Bob, I can never figure out, like, is he from the outside or is he from the inside? But nonetheless, he uses it very effectively to change my mind. So this new brain mapping initiative is thanks to Bob and his leadership from the outside as president of Cowhey Foundation, and thanks to many of our colleagues out here who took the initiative, many, many decades of work out here. And so I had the opportunity to meet Bob in Washington, D.C. in the White House. And I can tell you that everybody recognizes that Cowhey Foundation is playing a very significant role in defining the future of science for this country. So thank you, Bob. I cannot thank you enough. I take personal pride, even though I never enabled you. In fact, I tried to disable you from Carnegie Mellon. But in spite of that, I take personal pride in the great institution you have built. And I look forward to being a good steward of this and looking forward to working with you and your help in the future. Thank you very much and happy birthday.
So as nearly all of you know, we are in Atkinson Hall, the home of the soon-to-be named Qualcomm Institute of Cal IT 2. My pleasure to invite Dick Atkinson to come up and say a few words.
Let me say to the Chancellor, it's always a great pleasure to see you in action. You're very, very impressive. Bob, it's really a pleasure to be here on this occasion, and I haven't had a chance to say hello to you, but it's a very special moment. Yesterday there was a discussion of your remarkable career in science, in plasma physics, fusion research, and not only your career in science, but your role at the national level and the international level on science policy issues. Later today, there'll be a discussion of the Cowhey Institute, and I think the Chancellor's clearly indicated how critical the Cowhey Foundation was. During Bob's tenure at Cowhey, I think the foundation has become recognized as one of the truly internationally important foundations in the world. But my remarks today are going to be confined to Bob's role as the Dean of UCSD, but there will be some comments about the larger role Bob played in terms of engineering in the University of California system. I first met Bob in the early 1990s. It's a little hard to believe, Bob, but that's 20 years ago. And we, the university at that time, had some key people in fusion research, and we wanted to go after the ITER project, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. David, you remember that. And but when we wanted it located here in San Diego with the university playing a key role. But we just did not have a broad enough base of faculty to really support the kind of proposal we wanted to put in. And so Bob was identified by the faculty as the person that we had to recruit, and that became my job to recruit him to the university. He was at UCLA at the time, had a magnificent setup there in terms of a new facility. He was the founding director of an institute in plasma physics. He had a perfect situation. But we did get into a discussion, and that discussion morphed into a discussion about engineering, not at UCSD, but in the country as a whole, and what needed to be done to strengthen the engineering, the field of engineering. And that image that Bob painted for me really was very key at the time, because that is exactly how I wanted to see the School of Engineering evolve. We were able to recruit Bob, and he arrived here in 1994, both with the ITER project as a component of his arrival, but also as Dean of Engineering. What happened in his 9 years as Dean was really quite impressive. As the Chancellor indicated, the School of Engineering, by then it was called a school, although not much earlier. I've forgotten, Bob, when did we change from division? Did you do that? Oh. So the recruitment of Bob permitted us to sort of sell to the faculty the idea that we should no longer call it a division of engineering, but a school of engineering. And at the time, as the Chancellor indicated, it was ranked 44th in the country. At the end of his period as the dean, the UCSD School of Engineering was tied with two other institutions, Carnegie and Cornell, and it was for the positions 9th, 10th, and 11th. So I would say we had the rank of, on average, 10. In any event, it was a very impressive rise, as was indicated. There were other aspects to Bob's role here. The faculty went from roughly 80 individuals to about 180 individuals. He was a great fundraiser. He raised funds for over 25 endowed chairs in engineering, and he became a good friend of the Jacobs family, really involved Irwin Jacobs and in the development of the School of Engineering, and that led to a major gift from the Jacobs. And I do not know the details of where we stand in endowment as a School of Engineering, but several people have said to me that we probably have one of the largest endowments in the country fixed specifically for a School of Engineering. Bob also, and part of my concern was building bridges to the corporate community, and Bob was very good at that. He established very quickly what was called the Corporate Affiliates Program, and it had, by the time he stepped down, some 50 members, where each member was paying a significant amount of money each year to be interactive with the university. And that cooperative experience was very key to the evolution of the school. But what characterizes all of this, and there the Chancellor really captured the idea, it was Bob's focus on quality. He was really an excellent judge of talent and a good recruiter, and the quality of faculty that he recruited during his period as dean was quite important. As I said, Bob started as dean in 1994. I left in 1995, a year later, to become president of the system. But I can't read my notes with these glasses, and I can't see them without it. But in any event, in 1995, I became president of the system. Shortly after I became president, Bob was elected by the deans of the schools of engineering throughout the UC system as the chairman of the Dean's Council. And one of the first things they did, and Bob's hand was on this clearly, was to establish what was called the President's Engineering Advisory Council, and this was a council of leading engineering faculty in the system, mixed with a large number of leaders from industry. These were key people in the industrial sector, and it turned out that this group, once identified and once involved in UC, were just tremendously helpful in supporting the budget of the university. Out of that came our Industry University Cooperative Research Program, which was a system-wide program where faculty and groups from industry could make joint proposals, where the university funded the industry side of the university side of the project. And those projects, I think, were extremely important in helping us gain support for engineering at the university. And as I said, the industrial leaders on the committee were very important. Another thing that the committee did, or the President's Advisory Committee did, was make a study of engineering in the University of California. And it turns out that the percentage of students across the system who are in engineering is a very small percentage compared to institutions like Cornell or Michigan or Stanford or the like. And we were somewhat shocked to realize what a low percentage we had. Berkeley and UCLA had reasonable numbers, but those were even low. But throughout the system, it was extremely low. And what happened as a result of this input from the Advisory Council was that we had a one-year funding spike. And what the governor did, Gray Davis, was to make the decision that we should increase across the board engineering at the University of California. And the budget was set quite independent of that initiative, and we had a very good budget that year. But then in addition, as a side to the budget, we had a 50% increase in funds for engineering. So a 50% increase for the faculty slots in engineering, for the research and teaching assistants, for facilities, the whole range of things. So it was a major change in the University of California, and that was in part so because of the industry-university cooperative efforts that Bob pioneered so well here, and that built such a strong support for us in that community. And of course, there's the building that you're sitting in here, one of the California Institutes of Science and Technology. Bob was very critical at the presidential level of the university at helping us define what these programs should look like, and then, of course, Bob took a leadership role in developing the proposal. And I do know for a fact that the proposal that came out of UCSD, there were 6 proposals. Originally, we thought there were going to be 3 institutes. There were 6 proposals. They were so good, we should have funded all 6. But there was no question that we then added 1. The governor stepped in and provided the funds to add yet another. And then it was clear that the UCSD had the very best proposal of the group. I think I've run on too long. I was going to say something about the Stuart collection. Mary, you will say something later, so I'll leave that. Let me just say Bob and Ann have broad interests in music and in art. And there are collectors of art in their own right, but they were very critical, or Bob was very critical in ensuring that the Stuart collection continues. So I think I want to conclude by saying the characteristic that's defined Bob's career from the very beginning, and certainly as dean here at the university, was a focus on excellence. He had a talent for identifying leaders in the field, people who became leaders. And it's just, I think the date that Bob chose to join this university will go down in history as a very important milestone in the university. Thank you very much.
Irwin Jacobs, who of course we all know, co-founder, CEO, and chairman emeritus at Qualcomm, and we might also remember a one-time professor in the Jacobs School, couldn't be here today to share his comments with us in person, but we took advantage of technology to beam him in. Sit back and let's hear Irwin talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm really sorry to miss this symposium in honor of Bob Conn's 70th birthday. I have to think about that because I just passed that date myself 10 years ago. It's been a wonderful number of years since I first met Bob. And I think it was while he was debating whether to take the position as dean of the then just engineering school at UCSD. And he came to my office at Qualcomm, and we discussed his plans for the school. And he had a very coherent strategic plan at that time. And I must say, over the years, he executed that plan very well. I've really enjoyed working with him over the years, although it's cost me a few dollars. But it has really been quite special. And the school, under his leadership, grew tremendously and attained a great quality. We're involved with many adventures. I remember very early on the Wireless Institute, but perhaps even a larger, greater impact on the school and the community was the Cal IT2 effort. Bob came by, discussed the possibility of bidding for such an institute, and also having it focus on communications and information. And we became very excited at Qualcomm, and I became very excited personally. And so we're very pleased to help support that, and especially pleased when UCSD was awarded the Institute. And so it also has been very exciting watching not just the growth of the engineering school, but also of Cal IT 2. And between both, just so many wonderful things have been accomplished. Another aspect that was very valuable to Qualcomm and involved both the Institute and the school was the testing of our, what was called HDR, high data rate wireless system, to be able to transmit data over a cellular network. And the school and Institute equipped some UCSD buses so that they could drive around, receive the high data rate internet connection, and then provide by Wi-Fi connection to students who might be on board. And so that worked very well, and of course has led to an explosion in internet access using cellular systems. Bob and I, and Joan and Ann, have shared many wonderful experiences together on the art scene. Bob, of course, has a wonderful knowledge of and kind of ability to spot new artists and to select very cutting-edge art. And it was always fun to listen to Bob and Ann discuss pieces of art, both before they decided to buy them and, of course, once they were in their homes. And so it's wonderful to have this symposium to celebrate many of Bob's achievements in physics, of course, but in particular his leadership of the School of Engineering, his ability to attract faculty, to be able to grow the school, to have it now the largest engineering school in the UC system, and to just see the high quality that he was able to achieve. It's been a great pleasure knowing you, Bob, working with you over the years, and I look forward to many more years of being together. Have a great day.
So I'm sure some of you picked out the exquisite visual detail. This was our first attempt at producing a 4K video in-house. Hector and Alex did this as their first thing. And I have to say, I feel that real life feels like a poor imitation of a format like that. We're delighted that we have Bob Dynes here with us, President Emeritus, Chancellor Emeritus, and the original PI on the Cal IT 2 proposal. Bob.
Thank you, Ramesh. Leave that picture up. I'm going to refer to it in a minute, actually. You've heard much of the timeline from Dick Atkinson, the timeline over which Bob was the dean here. I can't help reminisce because we've known each other only for the 20 years that we first crossed paths until now. And that first crossing of paths occurred when I was professor of physics here. It just had come a couple of years earlier. And Dick Atkinson, who was chancellor, asked me to chair a search committee for the dean of engineering. So you're going to get the same story, but a different perspective. It's a little bit like Rashomon, different. So we did a pretty thorough search. It was a national search. And Dick asked me to produce for him 3 plus or minus 1 really superb candidates and not rank order them. And so I had a really good search team, all faculty, not all faculty, there was some staff and students in it. And we came up with really finally 2, I thought, outstanding candidates. Bob was one of them, and there was another one whom I knew quite well. And I did not rank them for Dick. I was pretty scrupulous about that. I had my own ranking, but I did not rank them. And my job then, I think, was to guide these 2 candidates through the interview process, through the faculty landmines and advised them so they didn't trip up, so that Dick would have a choice when it was all done. Does this sound familiar, Bob? And so my job then was, after we had decided that these two were just outstanding and either one would be terrific, was to help them through the interview process. One thing I remember at the time was that Bob was not shy about his vision for engineering at UCSD. Even then, he was not shy. And he had a vision for engineering at UCSD, most of which he has actually stuck to. And it was remarkable. Dick, of course, as you know, chose him. And Bob arrived about the same time I became the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. And so Bob and I interacted pretty closely because his immediate desire was to go out and find the best of the best of the best. And my job was to help him recruit those. And if I could, find the resources to help him do that. And he didn't stop. About a year later, I became Chancellor, and Bob was incessant. Made much of the other faculty nervous about his incessant nature. But he spent a lot of time with the rest of the faculty explaining his vision of engineering and how it fit into the campus. And my job as Chancellor was to make sure all that worked and we didn't have wars on the campus. A funny thing happened in that period. And Bob was building all the time. He was building. I mean, literally building. You walk around here and you know what I mean. Literally building. Buildings all around here. Literally building and building faculty. The funny thing happened in that period, and I never quite understood it, but periodically and then more frequently, people would refer to me as Bob Conn. Now, I can only assume that people referred to Bob Conn as Bob Dynes. There has to be some symmetry there, but it really did happen, and it made and I felt good about it because he had a measure of excellence and he was building, and I felt really good about what he was building and recruiting. And Bob and I together recruited some senior faculty, some very distinguished senior faculty. And he primarily went out and recruited many then junior faculty who are now senior faculty. It happens. But it was clear he was building something that would be really sustainable. And we developed a partnership then that led to, I believe, some outstanding things. And several people in this room represent some of those outstanding things. CSC, the nanosciences, bioengineering, and the relationships across the campus that over time, became really, really good. By far and away, I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking about what this building represents, Cal IT2, because I think it was, in my view, it was Bob's most magnificent triumph. All the while, he was talking about his vision for engineering and driving towards that vision of engineering. But when, through some brilliant insight that Richard Lerner and Dick Atkinson had, and believe it or not, some extra money in the coffers for the state of California, there was a time when there was. Governor Davis announced these California Institutes for Science and Innovation. And being at UCSD, which is an incredible place, and I'll I'll tell you why it's so incredible. I had a wealth of choices. We had to decide first where we were going to make a proposal, what area were we going to propose to the state. And think about this. I had a wealth. We had two areas that I knew we were actually unique. This was 1999, I think. The one area was global climate. And what was happening in global climate. We have SIO, engineering, the sciences, School of Medicine, Supercomputer Center. It was really quite amazing that we had all the pieces in terms of global climate that we could put together and have a unique proposal. The other, as you know, was information technology, telecommunications, and we had engineering, computer science and engineering. We had a supercomputer center. We had the physical sciences. We had medicine. And it was we should have and could have made two proposals, and they would have been both world-changing. How was I to know 12 years ago that both these fields would be so important, as important as they are today? Both of them. There wasn't another school in the country that could have done that except UCSD. I truly mean it. There wasn't another school in the country. I asked Bob, I chose telecommunications, and I chose it actually for a very pragmatic, two or three very pragmatic reasons. One was that Bob was here, and I knew this fit exactly into his vision for engineering. And secondly, we were and are surrounded by industry that would be supportive, both intellectually and financially. Now, it turns out we're surrounded. That ended up being support throughout the country, but we were locally surrounded, and we could meet some of the rules of the conditions that the governor put in place in terms of financial matches and things like that. So I asked Bob to go ahead with the planning. He identified some leaders, Larry Smarr being one of them, and we both worked on recruiting them. But Bob did it, and Bob identified all these people. And we identified UC Irvine as a partner. Bob had some connections and friends, as did I, and we made that connection as well with UC Irvine to meet some of the other necessities of this proposal. But the most important thing, I think, was the relationship that Cal IT2 developed and that Bob spent a lot of his time developing with the rest of the UCSD campus. There was extreme nervousness at the beginning. Faculty, for the most part, are extremely liberal with other people's lives and conservative with their own. And that came out. Bob worked around the entire campus with friends in the physical sciences, with Peter Cowhey in IRPS, with people in the School of Medicine. And so by the time we put the proposal together, the campus was really, really behind it. If you look at the disciplines in this building today, so I'm not talking about the building, I'm talking about what this became. If you look at the disciplines, of course it's computer science, electrical engineering, nanoengineering, physics, chemistry. I think I need my glasses to do this. Sociology, anthropology, art, music, medicine. You can't, international relations, you cannot imagine an institute in any university that has virtually all the disciplines of the university meeting here in this building. I said in 2000, with a little bravado, this is the model for the university of the 21st century. I say now in 2013, it is the model. It is the university of the 21st century. And Bob, you should feel very proud of defining the university of the 21st century. I'm really happy. Bob left in 2003. I left in 2003. It was within the square root of n, number 10 in the country, and that was his goal, to be in the top 10 in engineering in the country. It was, and the trajectory, and all derivatives were positive. The trajectory is still up. You've heard the numbers. Engineering more than doubled in size, more than doubled, a lot more than doubled, and it still goes. It has a reputation. It has a worldwide reputation, fulfilling the vision that Bob had the first day I met him 20 years ago. You've had a huge impact on UCSD, and it will continue. Happy birthday.
You heard Larry Smarr mentioned in Bob's comments. He also couldn't be here in person, and so we have a video recording where Larry gets to reflect on his interactions with Bob. So coming up, Larry.
Greetings to Bob and all of your friends and colleagues. I wish I could be there. As I look back over the last 13 years that I've been associated with you, the thing that most comes to my mind is your leadership in creating new institutional frameworks and initiating new futures, ones that wouldn't have happened without your personal involvement. It's a very special kind of leadership, I think. It takes the ability to imagine a future that isn't today, but is built on the components that are here today. And yet, if it happens, the future is transformed. Specifically, the idea that you could encapsulate in this Beebe Institute the leadership that we've seen in Southern California and information technology and telecommunication, but then to imagine that coupled to a wide range of applications which confront the real problems that California, the nation, and the world are going to have to be dealing with over the next few decades. That was quite an amazing achievement. And although most people who weren't there don't realize, you were the one who really had that vision and then helped recruit me and Ramesh to turn it into reality. You didn't stop there. You knew that for this to be successful, we had to not only cut down and the barriers between the silos of departments, schools, and even campuses of the University of California system, but more importantly, we had to also increase our outreach to industry and the community. Now, I had just arrived in 2000 from the University of Illinois, had no connections with industry, had no way to actually make this vision work, and more to the point, get the 2-to-1 match that we needed for the state funds. So as Dean of Engineering, you reached out to your industrial partners, asked them to double up their commitment and win one for Southern California. Without that, Cal IT2 would not exist as we know it today. But you didn't stop there. You personally mentored me when I needed to understand the details of how the University of California or University of California, San Diego worked. You provided me space on the same floor as your office for years. And then, even after you left the university, you continued to support us on the advisory board from the private sector, and then as president of the Kavli Foundation. And I know that as we look to the future, I can always call on you to continue to get these kind of deep insights about what the bold move is that will really change everything. So thanks so much, Bob. All of us owe a great debt to you, and happy birthday.
And finally, we have, as part of our planned speakers, Greg Papadopoulos, class of '79, from long before Bob arrived on campus, but we'll hear from Greg how that all played out.
First of all, this is a real privilege. I am the alumnus here, and I thought it's walking around here also and reflecting on what it was like when I came in the mid-'70s to the school. So I thought I would start by taking us all back to that time. I think it's safe to say that 1975, the choice of coming to UCSD was more of an eclectic one. It was, the surf and turf school of the UC system, and also just to calibrate you, there were 4 colleges. That was Revelle and Muir, and Third, and the freshly minted, without graduates yet, creatively named Fourth College, and that was the campus. There was plucked out way out in the middle of the forest, as we thought about it, was the not so central library, and just sitting. In fact, it was one of those buildings that it was remote, so I didn't really go to it very often. But it sort of scared me to go in it, because I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, what would happen, in a seismic event, and it really wasn't until I took a class from continuum mechanics from Y.C. Feng. Where he was explaining, and this is over in what is now, it was the APIS building, but it's the EP&M building at Muir. He was describing actually how wonderful the Central Library was, and all the different ways that it would survive seismic events. But then he said, but the building that we're in, on the other hand, as we're on the ground floor, he goes, well, you see the design on the side, we get the right waves here, and basically the floors are supported from the side, and it will come out and pancake down on us, so that's fine. And sorry for people here who work in that building, but it was, I would say at that time, I graduated from UCSD with a BA in system science. At that time, it was not, my knowledge, an accredited engineering institution. There was certainly no school of engineering. And I went off. It was actually a bit of a challenge to get it. I really wanted to go work and practice some engineering. It was a bit of challenge just to explain to people what the education was, which was a fabulous education. It was rich in science and art, and for me, the Revelle experience. HP did understand that. I worked there, and then found my way actually back to MIT, where I went into computer science and stayed there for a number of years until coming back here to California, joining Sun Microsystems. So that was the early '90s, just at the same time that Bob took over the School of Engineering, and I got reintroduced to UCSD at that time. And aside from sort of the obvious changes that were taking place on campus, I'll admit that what first attracted me back down was Sid Karin's work and the San Diego Supercomputing Center, and that was. A really interesting draw. But then this guy, Bob Conn, comes and said, hey, come and talk and lend a hand here in helping advise, where we go. And it was a remarkable transformation. And, from the perspective of now at Sun Microsystems, we had a division that was growing down here. Actually, ended up being our most profitable division in the entire company. Literally making billions of dollars in net profits for the company. Had hundreds of employees. But what was even more remarkable was actually the relationships that we had with the School of Engineering. were some of the best university relationships that we had in the country. It was just easy to work with people. It was this genuine spirit of, we want to do something. We want to get things done. It was a very significant thing, so much so that I actually opened an advanced development center down here just to be closer to some great work in things like photonics and thermal engineering and the like. If you think about this from an economic impact on the area, and I'll give you some numbers from the National Venture Capital Association. So now I am a venture capitalist, so I went on the dark side. But in 1995, which is really where kind of the first data that we have on this stuff, the San Diego region, there was just over about $250 million, $277 million invested in the region. If you warp forward a little more than a decade, in 2007, it grew 6.5 times. 1.8 billion was the investment, and I've factored out the bubble times. Right, this is really just solid growth. Of course, it's post. There was the recession dip now, but post recession, it's up at 1.1 billion, and Silicon Valley didn't happen overnight in this way either. But I very much. I think there's a really credible case to be made that UCSD is to the San Diego area what Stanford has been to the Valley, and I think Terman took Stanford into the engineering era in the 50s, and you could see the after effects here. And I think, Bob, you've been clearly the catalyst in doing that here at San Diego. I do want to take a little bit of a step back and just reflect on something, though, because this is a really special place. And I think that, everybody here, or most people are from here or, helped create it and stuff. And so there's a natural, fondness of it. And I'm obviously fond of it as my undergraduate alma mater, but I'm fond of MIT too. But there is something really, really special here. And I'm trying to really put that into words, and it has to do really with more of what engineering is. And engineering, to me, an engineer is an artist. Engineering is an art. It's an art form. It's a constructive art form, right? You have technological materials. It's founded in science. Those are your tools. Those are the constraints, right? But ultimately, we know, right, because it's constructive, not that there's no textbook that tells you how to build something, which is really, I think, one of the most surprising things that students learn through the process is that there's no formula that gets you to it. It's about what's your creativity that you apply to it. So it is this intersection of science's foundation, but also art, and then what do you create? Okay, this place feels great. I know we walk around and we were sitting outside and having some coffee and things this morning. There's something about a place that is so important. It's like very special. This building is very special if you just see the way that people interact in it and sort of the dynamics of it. The other thing that's special is that the school is so young, in the sense that this growth has been recent, despite all of the all of the academic challenges that there are, and what happens across departments and things. This is a very lithe, agile organization, and it is exactly perfect for where the next. I think real robust sets of accomplishments are, which is that we break down all of these barriers, the sort of different stovepipes that we build, chemical, neuro, whatever, over the last century or so of thinking about how educational institutions are organized and really allowing things to come together. And I think that's the other thing that's happened here. And I really wanted to emphasize that was this sort of the multidisciplinary cross. I was hearing this about the Brain Institute stuff. It's neuro and it's engineering, and we have them together. Right? And I think that's really special. Now, I think of it as the 20th century was the century of the scientist. And it was, the Vannevar Bushes and the great scientific institutions and foundations. And this is the century of the engineer. And it's the Bob Conns, and it's the great schools of engineering, and it's for the people who figure out this. Now, I wanted to just go back, though, to, as the school really started to grow and accelerate and the rankings were going up, so that, the special place is nowhere ever captured in a U.S. News and World Report ranking square root of n 10 thing. It's singular in my mind. I do remember, actually rather frightening so, is looking at how intensely competitive the admissions was becoming to the school, to the point where engineering was an impacted major through a few phases in the growth of the school. So many people wanting to get in, and then seeing, during one of our reviews, here's the average GPA and accomplishments and stuff. And I had this sort of terrified moment, which was, oh my God, there's no way I ever would have gotten into this school. And so now, actually, when I go around and say, well, I'm a UCSD grad, people hit, and particularly parents, they go, oh my gosh, how did you get in there? What's the secret so that my kid can get into UCSD? And, I just sort of smile. What is that secret? I actually just wanted to end this with a big thank you, and Bob has heard this from me many times here, but what's really happened for me is, all of you have built the value of this place in this most incredible way. And every year I come back, my degree is worth more. And I figure this is the best ROI in education ever, so thank you, Bob Conn.
Thank you, Greg. To be honest, even faculty members feel the same way about this. No way we would get hired back. So I know there's perhaps a number of you in the audience that might want to share some comments. So we have an opportunity to do so now. I would like to request that you come up to the podium because we are streaming this on the web and the audio carries better if you speak from here. So the floor is open to anybody from the audience that wishes to share any comments. I've been sitting through and listening to the various presentations, and I have to say that in some ways, fundamentally, Bob remained who he was. Bob, the researcher, used a certain approach to how he enabled and empowered his postdocs, his students. And when I was listening to them yesterday, it dawned on me that that's exactly what he did when he came over here to be dean. So many of us, I think, got an opportunity to try out our own ideas and learn as we were working on these bold new initiatives, what sorts of corrections we needed to make so we might succeed. Is that Ian in the back there? Hi, Ian. I've been sharing this joke with Bob many times. If you look at the program, Bob looks remarkably similar to you. So, Larry?
Rather than talk about all of Bob's really incredible accomplishments, I wanted to share a very small and personal story. On September 11th, 2001, my wife, Jean Ferranti, who's also in the Computer Science and Engineering Department, and I were in New York, and we got to watch the smoke come out of the World Trade Center. And people here in California were kind of insulated from the chaos and the sort of nobody knew what was happening in the East Coast. And we were stuck there because they canceled all plane flights for about a week. And meanwhile, I don't know how Bob even knew that we were there, but somehow he realized that two of his professors were there, and another was up in Boston, and another was down in Washington. And he put the four of us together. He got us in contact with each other, and so that we'd be able to support each other and somehow get back here in time for classes to start. So another thing that happened is we decided to drive across country, and it was impossible to get a rent-a-car. And nobody wanted to rent a large car that was just going to go one way across the country. And somehow or other, I don't know how he did it, or even if he did, but I'm pretty sure it was his hand in it. He magically made a rent-a-car appear for us, and we were able to drive across country and get back in time. So the point of this is, Bob cares about people, and he cares for people in the sense of getting things done, and he really is able to accomplish things. And I thank you for that.
See ya.
Well, many of you don't know that the engineers can also write poems. So I've written a little poem that I think befits Bob quite well. And it's called Remembered Line. We are born with the stars in our eyes. We struggle for a place in the story of life. But like specks of dust, we are washed away in the first stormy night. Yet some of us live on as marginal notes, and only a few as remembered lines.
Talk about engineering as an art form. Please. Mark?
Well, encouraged by Sia's wonderful poem, I garnered the courage to come here on this podium, and I'll say a few words. I'm just a professor in the trenches there, but a number of years ago, when he came, I was fascinated, and because he wanted to turn the university. I remember the rankings were 41, and he turned them immediately into 14. He inverted the numbers, and then proceeded to move the university up to what it is today. But the particular event that I tell you is that there was a soldier nanotechnology initiative from the Army, millions of dollars, and he called us and he says, we need to write a proposal. And we knew that our chances were close to nil, but he encouraged us and he made us greater than when we actually were. He gave me this job, and for 3 months, I worked incessantly on it. He provided all the support. He got help from SAIC, all of the technical support, and we at the end ended up with a proposal about 500 to 600 pages. Unfortunately, it did not get funded, but it really showed his organizational skills. I was amazed by that leadership provided, and I wish we had won this proposal, but there are other ones on the way. Congratulations, Bob, for your 70th birthday.
Perhaps we have time for one or two more. Lindy.
I never get up in front of any place because I was the assistant to Dick Atkinson years ago, and the description that really should have been for my job was a person who's gray on a background of gray. And so I have been so fortunate to be able to watch this institution grow. And I remember one of the first things that Dick Atkinson assigned to me was to try to bring together the university part for EATR. And I remember Dick saying, that Bob Conn is amazing. We've got to figure out about how we can get EATR and how we can bring Bob. He is an amazing guy. And I hadn't really met Bob Conn. I mean, I had only heard about him. And so I worked on the EATR proposal, and we were successful. And I think I worked for you about 7 years, and then about 10 years later, I got to work for Bob. And the one thing I have to say that both of you have that has been just I mean, you are giants on this campus, and I've been fortunate to work for you. But you have a vision that is so clear, and you know how you're going to get there. And that is such a unique thing, but you also have the ability to let people do what they do best and to do some corrections along the way, but to say what your vision is and then to let your people go and do that vision. And from a staff person's perspective, that is so rare. I mean, it's a great thing to hear it from faculty, people who have a lot of independence, but to also give that to the staff is just an amazing quality. And I've been fortunate with the leadership here to be able to work with both of you and to not tell all the secrets that I know that you, behind the scenes, how you've worked things to make them happen. And without you, it would not have happened. We know it. It was discussed last night with the brain. Those are the kind of things that make the difference, and I appreciate that you put the faith in the people to lead them and to make this university the tremendous university that it is. So thank you very, very much.
Perhaps one more set of comments. What we had on the program, of course, was a little break before we have the final session later this morning, starting at 10:45. Marianne?
This is totally unscripted, and I didn't expect to say anything, but I've been very pleased to be here. This has been very exciting to see everybody here together and to listen to all of your accomplishments, especially in leadership. But I also want to speak to the human side, because I think that's a very important quality that came through and that has led to your success as a leader. So there's a couple of stories that I can tell, because I think stories are more interesting to illustrate it. And one was when I initially came over to the Jacobs School of Engineering, and I'm sorry about my voice going, I just get nervous when I'm up here, but I really mean what it is I'm saying. A situation arose, and it was soon after Cal IT was determined that we were going to have this, and now we had to build it. And so we talked about it, and I gave him some advice. Now, I was new to the Jacobs School. I had been at the university for about 6 years, but I gave him some advice as far as the situation. And he listened to me, and he actually took it. And I have to tell you, that was one of the most empowering moments that I had when I got started. And I appreciate that very much. So we continued to work together, and one of the things that we did together was to facilitate the foundation gift for the campaign. And we set an appointment. We had been working towards this. We set an appointment to go in and speak with Irwin in his office when he was working on a daily basis over at Qualcomm. And the night before, in the afternoon, Bob and I met in his office, and he said, well, okay, this is what I've come up with. And I looked at it and I went, ooh, okay. Okay, the appointment's at 10 o'clock in the morning. Here, why don't you give this to me, and I'll take care of it, and we'll get together before we go in, and we'll talk about it. So I went home, fed my kids, got a babysitter, came back to the office, put things together. We met in the morning before we went over there. I remember it being a 10 o'clock appointment in his office. And we sat on either side of Irwin, and we had our proposal to put in front of him. And Bob's supposed to talk. I'm the development person, right? You're supposed to have the visionary talk. So the visionary's talking. And then I looked over, and he's sweating. And I looked at him and went, oh boy, okay. However, we made a really good team. And in the end, when Irwin put his hand out and put his hand on the proposal and drew it towards him, I knew we could go forward successfully. And I appreciated the opportunity to become part of that team. But I also wanted to point out the humanness that's involved as far as the relationships that really get us to greatness in leadership. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, so we'll reassemble at 10:45. Thank you. Aware of. So who knows what Peter has to say today. Peter.
Well, Bob, last night was family. Now we're being streamed over the web, so I'll shut up. I will note that we've heard a marvelous set of tales this morning about Bob's attributes as a leader. And I think that one of the most amazing parts of it was that he established these leadership traits early in his life, even when he still had the mustache. And the second thing I'll note is that if you actually created a proper engineering model of Bob's facial hair quota, that it shows only one level of variance as a variable over time, and I won't go any further than that. But as we've heard this morning, Bob is a leader, and a leader grounded in a deep command of science and engineering. And we've heard a lot about his traits as a leader, but I thought I would talk about three that have been important in our relationship. And if you'll excuse me, Bob, I'll be a little didactic in order to explain why I value these. The first of these is that Bob understood that global dynamics could drive the U.S. high-tech industries in directions that could surprise them in the long term, that they might not anticipate. And he was an early believer that people in the field of engineering should invest resources in trying to work with others, for example, in the social sciences, to understand those global dynamics that might grab the tail of U.S. high-tech industry. So early in the history of my School of International Relations and Pacific Studies, it was Bob who engaged with our faculty, particularly Professors Roger Bone and Peter Gervich and Steph Haggard, on building cooperation with CMRR on a project that was funded by the Sloan Foundation. And here's the project. It was a study of what would happen to the electronics industry, and particularly the storage industry, once you began systematically outsourcing low levels of assembly and manufacturing outside the United States. And that study was one of the pioneers in going beyond hand-waving to show systematically why the outsourcing phenomenon was not likely to stall out at low levels of production complexity. And to simplify its conclusions, one part of it was that there was enormous creation of human capital outside the United States by these efforts, learning by doing, and thus you built the engineering competence and eventually much of the support ecosystem offshore for those production levels. And so the early notions that somehow this was a permanent division of labor where the really valuable stuff was in the United States and this other stuff, well, that was labor intensive, it was easier, et cetera, that all started to dissolve once you start to think about that this way. But the second part of the study, besides showing the importance of that economics of learning by doing and human capital building, was to say, look at the places where U.S. firms are most comfortable outsourcing production in the long term. And it was places like Taiwan, Korea, and Singapore. And those were countries where there were concerted government efforts to upgrade the industrial technology establishment. Not in the failed mode of the 1950s or 60s of just simply protecting the local market and trying to build within the local market, but by aggressively attuning themselves to the global market as partners to U.S. firms in particular. And so that study was a trailblazer in pointing to many of these long-term dynamics that we are still wrestling with today, and the president is trying to, in a sense, not reverse, but to selectively slow down and divert by creating an emphasis on high-end manufacturing competence for the United States in the future as a complementary asset to our reinvestments in science and technology leadership. There was a second area that reflected, again, Bob's keen curiosity and his willingness to think beyond the standard ways in which engineers and many people in the technology industry think about the world. Bob grasped the fact that public policy could be more than a nuisance to high tech or a hazard even. Instead, he understood that for many of the key technology industries of the future, public policy could be a building ground for their success. Now, perhaps this occurred because Bob was grounded in his early work in nuclear fusion, and so he understood that the government was a powerful force for good or bad in shaping technology horizons. But his deeper insight, since many engineers would stipulate that, well, R&D expenditures matter for the creation of dynamic high-tech industries, was to understand that the government did a lot of other things beyond taxation and R&D that might make a real difference to the takeoff of the technologies that the United States was on the frontier of. And in a sense, that was the beginnings of Bob's and my, if you would, intellectual and academic entrepreneurial partnership. I had just returned from 3 years in the Clinton administration. Bob was thinking about the next stages for the engineering school and what rapidly became the project of KLIT Squared and down the road. And we started to talk about this. And here was the conversation that we had that crystallized in KLIT Squared, but started before then, which was, if in fact government could be this powerful enabler for new technology industries, what could we learn from some of our recent examples of those interventions? And the one that was, of course, enormously important both to San Diego as a region and particularly to this school, namely the emergence of Qualcomm as a global technology leader, had been exactly entangled in this story of government enabling of new technological opportunities. And what had happened was that in the Clinton administration, two things had happened. The first was that it recognized that in the telecommunications industry for wireless, the tradition was that governments, in consultation with their leading companies, would set mandatory technology standards for the mobile communications industry. That is, literally through the standards process, dictate which technology would be used for mobile communications. And everyone accepted that as the only way to do business. And the second assumption that was in the marketplace was that the way that you assigned radio spectrum, which was the new Manhattan real estate of the high-tech world, was to do it by what we used to call beauty contest licensing, which is the US government and all the other major governments of the world would ask companies to show the most reasonable and attractive and reliable package for having radio spectrum turned into a communications network, And the government engineers would sit back and rate it on various things of robustness, reliability, coolness, et cetera, which meant that ultimately people like me were deciding which company would get this valuable spectrum. Well, the problem with the beauty plan was exactly that it emphasized the known territory of what was reliable around the known consensus of the incumbent firms that have been doing it forever. And if you combine mandatory technology standards and a system of beauty contests for assigning spectrum, guess what that was a recipe for? That new entrants with new ideas and radically different ways of doing things should not apply. And so the creation of a combination of a market-based system for assigning radio spectrum through the use of auctions, and I might add that the late John McMillan of IRPS was the principal person thinking that out for the US government, plus insisting on technology neutrality as a public policy translated into an international trade obligation for all the major markets, opened the door to a whole different type of technology innovation system. Well, that story that Bob and I talked about a lot led Bob to the conviction that the university should invest in understanding those dynamics on a broader scale. It was much to my pleasure and surprise that Bob one day called me and said, you know, we're talking with Qualcomm about this deep engagement at a new level, and besides creating chairs that would be in computer science and other areas critical to Qualcomm, I've told them they should create a chair in technology policy because the university should invest in that as well, and it even shouldn't be in the School of Engineering. And it so happened that down the line, I was the first holder of that chair. But the deeper point was that Bob said, let's have Cal IT Square embrace this as a value of Cal IT Squared in thinking about the world. And from that came many of the early activities of Cal IT Squared that helped influence the subsequent ways in which the US government and European governments, even France, thought about the way in which government policy would intersect with novel technologies in the emerging mobile broadband space. So again, Bob sort of stretched the art of the possible and the imagination for thinking about the bigger intersection of engineering with the world. The third thing that I wanted to talk about with Bob is sort of a direct counterpoint to one of the most famous acronyms or aphorisms, I should say, about universities in the second half of the 20th century. When Henry Kissinger was a young Harvard professor, courting those who were powerful and rich, you know, the great statesmen of the age, people like David Rockefeller, to be his patrons in his rise, one of his favorite taglines that he used to use at places like the Council on Foreign Relations, to everyone's amusement, was, academic politics are so petty and intense because the stakes are so low. And all of us who've lived in university know that Kissinger was right about certain parts of academic politics. But Bob was, to me, out of a different genre and narrative. In fact, he's a torchbearer for one of the greatest traditions of the American science and technology tradition, which I have to add is a tradition that drove my interest in technology policy as a central problem for my scholarship. And that is the ability to fundamentally transform the underlying dynamics of our lives by broad transformations of the infrastructures that surround us. A world with communication systems, clean water systems, electricity, or the ability to deal with the underlying dynamics of our minds is a world that is fundamentally different in all aspects of everyday life. And I remember that when Cal IT Squared was in its creation mode, Bob understood this transformational capacity much more clearly than most of the participants. it was still a time when people were amazed and dealing with the rise of the World Wide Web and e-commerce. Bob understood that this would change everything, not just the obvious first applications. And he insisted that San Diego as a place, UCSD as a university, and the right vision of the future could capture that broader transformation. Now, that story's been told in a couple of different ways this morning already, and so I won't dwell on it. But the point I want to make is that after Bob left UCSD, he and I continued these conversations. And although Bob doesn't fully recognize it, the time I spent in the Obama administration was not just part of the pivot towards Asia, as it's been called in the press, but a time when the negotiating policy of the United States on international trade doubled down its bets on the fact that there were a series of emerging technological capabilities, whether it's cloud computing or so many other areas, that were going to become transformational again. And that was, in part, a tribute to Bob, because our conversations had led me to think about what's the next big transformational issue where government could either really make it happen faster by being prudent or really make it hard to grab the prize. And so it's been a wonderful partnership with Bob. I've been lucky to learn a great deal from him. And above all, I think that the remarkable thing that we've heard today is the consistency of the stories about Bob's ability to envision things far beyond the normal realm of what we call visionary. Well, with that said as my remarks, let me turn to introducing the people on this panel who are truly distinguished and have been making many of these changes happen over the years. And our first contributor in this panel is David Miller, who's the Emeritus Associate Dean of Engineering and Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UC San Diego, and in himself one of the pioneers here in the School of Engineering. Dave?
Well, this is sort of a treat, but I'm part of the gray background. But I've been on the campus long enough that I wanted to say a few remarks about what went on before Bob, and then the rush of excitement I had when Bob came on board. Because engineering started out as pretty much an engineering science program, but of high quality here. I mean, when Henry Booker came out and established the Applied Electrophysics Department, and Saul Penner came down and did the Applied Mechanics and Aerospace Engineering, it was all about quality from the top down, and that really set the foundation all the way through, and I think it's been maintained. The idea that Greg could take a course from Y.C. Fung as an undergraduate. When I came here, assistant professors were not permitted to teach undergraduate courses in my department. That was great for me. I got graduate courses. So anyhow, engineering puttered along, very competent, very happy actually. We had high quality graduate students and things like that, but something had to happen as the campus was growing. We had a dismal time in the 70s under Reagan and Brown, and it was quite depressing by the end of the 70s, and a lot of people, including myself, were thinking about leaving. Then Duke Magin became governor, and a very important thing happened. We were in competition, a national competition, there was a consortium of industry to establish a big, I forgot the name of it now, it was a materials thing, processing of micro something, and we lost that competition to Arizona. We were one of the two finalists. And what the positive thing came out of it is the committee let Governor Duke Magin know that the reason we lost it was there was no support from the state. It was hard to get him down here to do that. And they said, we're not going to bring a bunch of high-quality people to a place that doesn't support education. And Duke Magin went back, and that's my little vision. He started turning on the spigot and gave us a lot of growth money in the 80s. Of course, we had a budget crisis later. And about that same time, Dick Atkinson showed up from NSF, and he was very much like a Bob Conn. He had vision and knew what we needed to do. He just couldn't conceive of a first-rate public university without a very strong school of engineering. And in fact, he had established the Directorate of Engineering at NSF. So I was just beginning my first stint as chair of the Applied Mechanics Department. and I got a call by John Miles, who was Vice Chancellor, that I was supposed to be on a committee to establish a School of Engineering. This was in 81, 82, in a culture where that was going to be very difficult to do with the college system and sciences. We had no deans at that time. So I chaired a committee with some very strong people. It was wise that they put some very top-notch people on, some of who we knew would oppose such a move. Paul Libby was on there, and he was one of the protectors of the college system. And we were struggling. We were getting lots of data and trying to make the case why we knew we needed to have a School of Engineering. And frankly, no one denied that. That was what engineering needed to do. It just probably wouldn't happen on this campus. And I remember one night, Don Norman was on it. He was from college. He was this person that started the cognitive science department. Later went on to Apple and stuff. He was on there, and we were talking about how to do this. And we couldn't figure out a way to make it work on the campus with our academic senate and college mentality. And Don suddenly said, we have a problem with labeling here. He said, the problem is, don't call it a School of Engineering. And so we talked about it, and we thought of the Caltech model and came up with Division of Engineering. And on a Friday night, I called John Miles, and I said, John, we have a real problem here. This is not going to work out. Dick's not going to get a School of Engineering. I said, but the committee wonders if we could stick with the label Division of Engineering. I got a call back in 1 hour, and Dick said, that's great, go for it, I'll take it. I'm not worried about the name. And that's the kind of adaptive vision I think that Bob had, but Dick had that same thing. We got to move forward, and that's to make it work. Dean Rudy, I want to say just to compliment Dean Rudy, because he was dean for more than 10 years. He was the first dean on campus. And by the way, every time engineering would push something through, we pushed the first BS program through, and suddenly the other sciences wanted a BS. And we got the first dean, and 3 years later, everybody else wanted a dean, but that's the way you do things. It was very important to engineering to have this identification to the community outside. And Rudy became the first dean, and I think he was the perfect dean for that. He had been provost of a college, he understood the culture and mentality of the faculty, and he helped ease the things, the Division of Engineering in, and maintained a very high quality. He oversaw the first center for magnetic recording and research. He had to deal with the patent issues of doing that on. This was all difficult for the Senate and some of our colleagues to absorb how we were going to do this thing. Quite imaginative. So I think we owe a lot to the foundation that people like Lee Rudy built, and he maintained that quality. And I think Bob appreciated it. I'm sure that he took that into consideration before he came down. He looked at the quality of the faculty and what was here already. But about that time when Lee was stepping down, I think most of us knew we needed to make a change to go to another level. We just didn't know how to do it. Well, Dick Atkinson knew how to do it. He said, "I'll bring Bob Conn down here." You get into a box as a faculty member. You're doing good research, good teaching. It's hard to see your way to the next step, the next level. And we had to go to the next level. We knew that with the growth of engineering, because engineering took off in the 80s also. We were on the tail. We didn't even have accredited engineering programs when Dick Atkinson arrived. Faculty said, we don't need that. Anyhow, my first contact, knowledge of Bob Conn, I got a probe from Atkinson's office about, did I think as chair of the department at the time that this guy Conn could become a faculty member in our department. He was looking for a place to put you. Of course, plasma physics, you think of physics or engineering. So I said, well, send me over the CV and I'll look at it and let you know. Well, you can imagine it was a pretty easy decision to make, especially when I found out he had a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Pratt Institute, because I have a lot of respect for chemical engineering degrees. That's my degree. But it was an easy decision to make, and then I didn't hear much about it back. And then when Lee was going to step down, as Bob said, he was on the recruitment team. I took off on sabbatical, and they'd picked Bob, and I was coming back from sabbatical, and I was giving a talk in Nebraska. I had a former student there, and I was stopping in Nebraska on my way back. I was on sabbatical, and some guy named Atkinson wants to talk to you from your campus. Okay, and I didn't have any idea what he was calling me about. I thought maybe my group had fallen apart or something. But he had said, where Bob Conn's going to come down as dean, he's really going to need someone here to help work with him who understands his campus and can and can help him interact with the faculty and make some decisions. And I'd really like it if you'd consider working with Bob when he came down. I said, well, okay, but I'm going to finish out this term on sabbatical, and I can do it in January. That would be perfect, because Bob was coming down, I think, in January. But I said, I've got to talk to this guy. And Bob wanted to talk to me right away, so I got back in the fall, went up to UCLA and met with Bob, and I think we met for about an hour. And I think we hit it off right away in terms of what we thought needed to be done, not the details. So I agreed, and I have to tell you, the next 3 or 4 years of my life were just wonderful. They see the acceleration and the vision. And Bob came down in January and had to start, he had a plan. I mean, Bob Dynes knew about these plans. I didn't know about the details of it, except I knew he was probably the right person to take us to the level. But he had to make a decision right away, and that was whether or not to okay the Department of Bioengineering. That was gone through all the paperwork and all the stuff like that, but they weren't going to really prove it till the new dean thought it was a good thing to do. And one of the first conversations I had with Bob was about bioengineering, because there was an issue there. It was a very small faculty. And one of Bob's principles was critical mass. When he was going to do something, he had to do it right. And the issue was, was the faculty big enough? But the overriding principle of Bob, as has been said many times, was quality. And he talked to me about the faculty and how they did it. And he also knew, I think, that this was a decision made to leverage the bioengineering into the future. There are a lot of things they could do. So he made that decision pretty quickly to approve bioengineering. And his planning process, he's a dean with vision, but it's a very dynamic vision. And he always had a plan. The other big decision he made right away, this was, he came down in the 90s. We had just come out of a very brutal budget cut in the 90s. Not as bad as right now, but it was a second big brutal cut. And we had a lot of VERUPs, very early retirement incentive programs. And we had lost a lot of faculty. In my department, MAE, had 6 faculty we lost. We were supposed to get those back, because in those days, it was one-offs, right? If you lost a faculty member, boy, you were in line to get the next one. Bob came down and said, that's not the way it can happen if you really want to build a school. So he had a plan about the future, and he decided that MAE, my department, which was Ames at the time, he wasn't quite sure that we had a good plan of where we were headed and what we were going to do. Now, I have to tell you that the department, and I was over working with Bob, but actually I agreed with him pretty quickly, that we didn't know what to do with these 6 FTs, and the worst thing in the world would do is go back and replace A with A and B with B, which is a way we had done it a lot. If you lost a person in combustion, you hired a person in combustion. Bob said, no, that's not the way you can build this up. And he had another group growing very fast. It was computer science. And so he said, I'm going to use those 6 right me and put them where he knows it can be successful and be leveraged, and that was in the computer science. You may not remember all this, but I do, because it was my department. But he said, don't worry, as soon as your department gets its act together and we figure it out, the resources will come. And they did, and he brought in groups, and he realized we needed to build up controls. And Bob always planned, when he did his strategic planning, he always had these ideas of focus areas of strength, and that meant critical mass. If you were going to do something, you had to put the resources into it. And so when he finally decided that MAE was ready to hire 5 or 6 people, it was going to be in the controls area, and he went out and got Bob Skelton and built up, which is probably today one of the strongest controls groups in mechanical engineering in the country, and it's just what's been said many times, the quality, he brought quality here, and that quality serves himself. And all along, his decision-making process, this dynamic vision, was amazing, and it's been said several times. When he made a decision and wanted to do something, he always had, it was like a chess player, He would, this was a good move to do, it had a lot of positive things, and even if this didn't work out, as long as it was quality, something would work out. He was always thinking ahead to the next one. And I was always amazed how he could adapt very flexibly and quickly to that, whether it was a meeting with, I should say the second great thing he did, no, I'm not the great thing. A second thing he brought was to bring Paul Croft over, who was sitting up there, because Paul was the sort of the management officer of the dean, and he brought him over from chemistry because he really understood the campus. And Paul and Bob and I would sit around a lot of times and talk about how we were going to get things done and could we get them done. And I know Paul and I would always be amazed that Bob was going into a meeting, sort of like was commented this morning, it didn't matter whether it was faculty or industrial affiliates, and he was going to go into the meeting trying to accomplish this, and he was going to lay out a plan. And we could watch him right in the middle of the meeting as he listened to people and filtered that, and I know you heard that yesterday, and suddenly changed the whole outcome of the meeting. And Paul and I would come back out and said, that's not what we were going to go in there to do. No, that we came out with it. But then we would sit there and say, it's a better plan. And it all involved in an hour meeting or something like that. So Bob was always thinking and always being able to do that. So I have a lot of the data has been shown about his accomplishments, the buildings. He went on to the big decision next was what to do with a large department. Should he approve a department of structural engineering? And that was not an easy decision either. They were small, and Bob had a lot of thoughts about whether it should be civil engineering or structural engineering. But he did, in the end, listen to the senior faculty and stayed with structural engineering. And so he formed the Department of Structural Engineering. Bioengineering, as I said, was formed in his first year. And then he redefined the applied mechanics back into mechanical narrow space. So he oversaw that transition, but always with the backup and the resources to make it work, which was really essential. His other great attribute was development and fundraising. Dick talked this morning about the engineering initiative that I had moved over into central administration about after 4 years with Bob to work over there, and I think you were kind with your words this morning. Bob could be a real pain in the rear end. He was Bob Conn. That Bob. I think you said incessant. Because he was so good at what he did, there was a sort of paranoia on the campus. And when that engineering, but Bob was always over there explaining it. He was really good to come over and explain it, whether it was on PRC or something. But I could see it over there, and sort of with a smile, because even when he was right, it was sometimes we couldn't make it work, and that would frustrate Bob. I mean, let alone the academic senate. By the way, I should say the reason we couldn't do a school of engineering is still true today. When we said no to Dick was because a school in California is supposed to control its own admission and grant its own degrees, and that just can't happen on this campus. So Dick Atkinson made a deal with the Senate that we can call it a school, but we promise not to do that. That is still a problem to this day about the admissions thing, and I hope they'll solve that. So anyhow, I think the engineering initiative was very important, and it wouldn't have worked without Bob being able to go out and raise money for startups. Those things came down with hardly any funding with them, and Bob had to go out and raise money to make them work because you can't hire an engineering faculty on $60,000 a year. So that was a big part, development and fundraising and keeping it going, that he was able to do. But the other part of it was political on campus. When those things came down, I don't know how many meetings, because Atkinson had made it very clear this was over and above all the other things, and Bob had to constantly remind us over the administration that that was not to influence the decisions about the normal allocations. And that was a challenge, because the physicists say, well, if you're going to build engineering, you got to build up physics and chemistry. So, but Bob was always there trying to explain it, and as you said, he was always willing to take the, where's Lindsay, I don't see her, always willing to stand up and take the bullets for it. And we tried to work with him, and I was always pleased to see Bob take on an initiative, whether it was trying to improve technology transfer. That was another big one. He'd hammer out a way and say, this is what the campus should do, and sometimes we didn't make it, but we always know he had the right idea. And actually, most of the things that Bob accomplished in changing policy or procedures or new things on campus were good for everybody in the end. It's just that how we got there. So I've watched Bob as working with him, and it was really a tough decision for me to leave engineering because I knew where it was headed. And he certainly set the platform for continued success, as everybody has said this morning. And I had lots of data, but I don't need to read you all this data. I will say one thing. Bob had a vision about the steady state plan, and this was the numbers. I remember these numbers. It was to have about 4,500 undergraduates, and this year we have 5,638, and that's too many. They're really working to get them back down. He wanted to have about 1,500 grads, and right now we have 1,548. And then Bob thought that the correct limit, and he's right, was around 250 faculty. And we're hung up around 190 now. And that's because of the budget crisis that we had with the dot-com in '02 and what's going on now. Usually these budget crises would come every 10 years, and these last ones came in '02, '03, and then '07, '08. And so they didn't quite make, but they need that faculty and growth. Anyhow, Bob, wherever you've gone and whatever you've done, you've always had a tremendous impact on UCSD and engineering, so I wish you happy birthday.
So no story of engineering at UCSD would be complete unless we had Shu Chen, who is the founding chair of the Department of Bioengineering and who holds the highest honor of the University of California system of being the University Professor of Bioengineering and Medicine.
Thank you very much, Peter. Bob, it's been a great honor and privilege for me to know you during the last 20 years. When we first met in 1993, when you were already appointed as the incoming dean for the School of Engineering, I had the privilege of meeting with you to talk about the planned bioengineering department, as Dave mentioned earlier. The Department of Ames has several programs, of which bioengineering was one of them. We had 6 faculty members with Y.C. Feng that Greg mentioned, and other faculty. And it was very good in quality, but size is small. And I think one of the reasons why it's small is because it's not a department. I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem. So we thought we need to break through and to have a department. And as Dave said, it has gone through all the reviews. It took 2 years, but then it came down to approval by the dean. And Bob was coming in as the new dean, so we had to get his approval. So I wanted to see him. And I thought it would be going to be difficult because his expertise is in fusion energy. And bioengineering is a bit away from that. But I noticed that he does plasma physics, and in bioengineering we do blood plasma. Well, it's a different plasma, but just as a joke. But so I felt much better. But seriously, Bob was so capable of grasping the essence of any situation, even though it is relatively new for him, like the field of bioengineering. He very quickly grasp the essence of the argument, and he deliberated very quickly. As Dave mentioned, after a short time, he approved the establishment of bioengineering as a department, which was very, very important because then we're able to recruit faculty and have a curriculum student program of our own, and this and the infrastructure. This was very, very important. And as a result, we're able to do all the things we have been doing in the subsequent years. It was a very difficult time. It was in 1993, as Dave also alluded to, the campus was in a very difficult financial situation. Our School of Architecture had been approved, and the dean was appointed, but the school was closed. And I don't know what happened to the dean that was appointed, but anyway, the Department of Athletics was closed, and here we are trying to have a new department. It's very, very difficult under that circumstance. Actually, for several years, as I understand, there had been no department formed on this campus. So it's really because of your strong support, Bob, and our central leadership in our Chancellor and the other leaders in the university that were able to do what we wanted to do, to have the Department of Bioengineering. And then we were given a great deal of support that we got started in 1994 when Bob became the dean here, and I was the founding chair, so I had the opportunity and privilege of working closely with Bob. He was most supportive. in terms of faculty recruitment, student program initiation, and infrastructure building, and to make the bioengineering really grow. And the bioengineering department was fortunate in having the support of the Whitaker Foundation Development Award. In that difficult financial time, that development award was very, very valuable. It was $1 million a year for 5 years, and that was able to bring us to speed in this difficult startup period. And Bob's support and advice was very, very critical. And the Whitaker Foundation has an annual site visit to review the program, and Bob always makes a point to meet with them and to be at the site visit, so he got to know them very well. And a few years into his deanship, as has been said by many, Bob always looked for new ways of improving the quality and make whatever there is better. So he felt bioengineering should improve even more. One of the things that was needed was the space. We were in the EBU-1, now the Jacobs Hall, in about a floor and a quarter. That was what we had, and that's why we had only 6 faculty. And Bob said, we have to have a new building. And to go through the state system, it would take a long time, so he said, why don't we go to some private source? And here we have the relationship with the Whitaker Foundation, so he had the idea that we should go after them. So what he did was to go out to Washington, D.C. to visit the leadership of the foundation. And he was able to convince them that the best way for the foundation to achieve its goal, which is to promote biomedical engineering throughout the United States, is to have a new kind of award to construct new buildings. Then in one visit, Bob was able to convince them. I mean, this is what Bob can do. And of course, he has the right argument, but you have to have a person who can present it effectively. And that's what he did. And the Whitaker Foundation really agreed with that, and they initiated this leadership award to construct new buildings. So, of course, we're one of the schools that were ready to apply for that with Bob's initiation to begin with. So we applied for this Whitaker Leadership Award, and we made a lot of effort to plan to get us scientific parts together, not only in engineering, but in medicine, because it's very important to have medicine together with engineering. And also we have to work out the budget. The Whitaker Foundation wanted to have 1-to-1 matching. So whatever we need from them, we have to match equally. It's a little better than the KIT 1-to-2 matching, but it's still 1-to-1 matching. And Bob said he would take care of the matching. I mean, that's one thing that was a big relief that he would do that. And then we worked together on this budget. So we talked about how big the building should be. So we looked at the projected faculty for bioengineering. We needed a building that would, at that time, would cost about $18 million. And Bob always, goes full force forward, but he's judicious. He always calculates very carefully. He said, let's not go all the way to 18. We apply for $14 million. Of course, with the matching, it's $28 million. So it'll be a smaller building where accommodate less of the faculty. And he said, we better do that. So we agreed that we'll proceed with that kind of plan and say, if possible, maybe later we can ask for supplement. That's better get your foot in the door first and then get the additional when if we succeed. And so I remember the day before we submit a grant, we stayed up very late in your office to work over the budget, mainly to titrate this amount. How much should we ask for? And then the next day, Paul Croft and the others will put it really into the real thing. Then we can FedEx off that afternoon. We had no electronic transmission those days, so we had to catch the FedEx. But anyway, we did come to this final budget, and we submitted. Now, pretty soon, we got information, we got a acceptance of this proposal, and there will be a site visit. They will bring people to our school here to site visit the proposal. And Bob really putting a lot of effort to help with administrative support and infrastructure support. Of course, our faculty did a lot of work together with medicine and engineering, and we really prepared very, very well. So when the site visit came, it was the Whitaker Foundation leadership, the president, vice president, and also the family of the Whitaker, Dr. Holmes, and the two Dr. Holmes, and they were really on every site visit, Mrs. Shoemaker and all the scientists they invite from other universities, they came here. And it was a very wonderful visit for 2 days. And it really went so well. I remember at the final break, before they deliberated on the outcome, Bob spoke to me, said, "I've never seen so much intellectual power in one room." Excitement was in the air. I mean, is that what you said to me? Yes, that I always remember. I mean, the excitement was just unbelievable. So we waited, and then they called me in as the PI, and he said, one of the first questions they asked, why did you apply only for a building that accommodates 2/3 of your people? Why not the whole department? So I just told them about what Bob and I talked about. We wanted to make sure that we get a grant, so we don't want to be too ambitious. We want to be a little reasonable. But if we can get a whole building, we certainly would appreciate that. It's amazing that they said, why don't you write a letter to apply for this additional amount? So Bob and I worked on this letter, and we submitted it. Of course, the other thing is we have to have the matching also, another $4 million. I mean, one of the reasons why we said $14 million is not just because we're worried about whether they give us the $18 million or not. It's the other $4 million we have to match. And so Bob and I talked about it. He said, don't worry, let's go for it. And I'll work on the $4 million. And that's how Bob was. And he just look at, if the opportunity out there, grasp it. Don't let it go. And so we seized the opportunity and submitted a letter. It's a 2-page letter, and they approved it. So it's $2 million a page. Now, for Bob, this may not mean too much. When he was with Enterprise Partners, his one page gets a lot more money than that. But for me, this is huge. I've never had anything close to that, $2 million a page. And that's how it came about. And so we got this money, and that's the building across the courtyard here. Every day we go in there and appreciate what Bob has done for us, not only me and my colleagues, I see Gert Shumashumba is here, and many others. We all appreciate this opportunity and enjoy that. What Bob has done is not just for UCSD bioengineering, but he actually has done this for the whole United States biomedical engineering, because the Leadership Award, once it started, it was open to competition. At least a dozen of the top bioengineering programs have been supported by this Leadership Award. So I visited these campuses. They all have these Whitaker-supported buildings. So it's really a nationwide thing. It's because of Bob's initiative. And it's not only the U.S., because biomedical engineering, because what we have done, it influences the whole world, everywhere, Europe, Asia, everywhere. You see biomedical engineering popping up. And so it's the whole world. So I look at this, it's very nice to say enabling the future, the Jacob School, UC San Diego, and the region. I will add the nation and the world. It's really have that kind of impact, even though it may not be seen directly. But in biomedical engineering, I think there's no doubt this is really the case. This is Whitaker Foundation makes a big impact, and Bob, you have a major part in that. So we really appreciated this very much. Of course, for our own program, as a result of this, we can improve continuously. Our ranking was going up from the days when Bob came here, just like the school, everybody said, from the 40s, the ranking 40-some to top 10. And bioengineering, similarly, from unranked before, and it got into the top 3, 4 consistently in the last decade. And particularly the most important survey, the National Research Council, once every decade ranked us #1 in 2010. So all of this is because of all of the background that I described. So I want to thank Bob for what he have made possible for bioengineering and for the School of Engineering, the Jacob School, and the university. So Bob, you are not only a great scientist and engineer, a wonderful mentor and teacher, and superb administrative leader. You're also a very successful entrepreneur, and now a marvelous foundation president. You always, as everybody has already said, always has the vision beyond the ordinary. You're truly outstanding vision, and you have bold initiatives, and yet you are practical, reasonable, and you have ways of accomplishing them. I think these are the key elements. You've done this for Jacob School and for UCSD before, and now you're doing it with the Cowhey Foundation, like the Mapping the Human Brain initiative. You use the same approaches, your talent, your capability. So I think it's really wonderful, and we're very fortunate to have you as our dean. And in closing, I'd like to say that there's a Chinese saying, that when you reach 70, you can do whatever you want. But there is a qualification, it says, because you know the bounds. That's what the Chinese saying is. And Bob, you've been able to do whatever you want because you have the right way of doing it. And you know the bounds, except that your bounds are not the same as other people's bounds. We have a static bound, so I don't exceed that. You have a dynamic bound. You're always pushing the frontier, getting to farther and farther, better and better. And on this wonderful occasion of your 70th birthday, best wishes for a happy birthday and many, many happy returns, Bob and Ann.
So the story about Bob raising money by the page reminds me that that's the academic equivalent to a free lunch. And I am supposed to remind you there is actually a free lunch today following this session. It will be outside. And also we have a guest book where you came in and picked up your badge, where you can leave a written testament of your thoughts about Bob as well. So having made those two announcements, let me turn to our next member of this session, and that's Professor Rajeev Gupta, who is a Qualcomm Professor of Computer and Electrical Engineering and the Chair of the Department of Computer Sciences. Rajeev.
Thank you, Peter. Dick Atkinson said Bob had a talent for identifying talent. But he did much more than that. And I say that because I think I was one of those talents he identified to come. And after I had accepted the offer to come to UCSD, a couple months later, Bob called and said, Rajesh, I want you to know, you will hear soon that I've decided to step down as being dean. And I'm thinking, what? All this personality that he brought to hire me, and he's going to be leaving. After the initial reaction, I thought about it and thought about the DNA that Bob was leaving behind. I was the junior most senior faculty, or senior most junior, whichever you want to look at it. And Bob took the time. I think that year, Jacob School had hired something like 10 or 12. Bob took the time to call and explain to me why he thought 9 years is more than enough to lead a great school of engineering. So I accepted. Bob did more in a way in which he enabled us to feel more than we were. And how do I know this? Sometimes we think of our memories, and time makes everything look golden and fonder. But it truly was a golden age under Bob's leadership, even though I was not here at that time. The reason I know that has to do with how I met Bob first time. Bob does not know this because I was sitting behind him. I was one of the coordination meetings at Irvine about this new proposal we were putting together. A room full of people with all sorts of ideas and so on. And Bob raised his hand and said a few comments. Then I had a colleague from computer science in Irvine sitting next to me. So I said, who is this guy? He said, and these are his exact 2 words. He said, he's smart and he's aggressive. He's Bob Conn. I was very impressed. The reason I was impressed is because Bob put a face to something that I had been studying for a year already. And what was that? Well, we had a new executive vice chancellor at Irvine, I think 2000 or 1999, something like that. And one of the first things he did was form a core group of people. I was one of those. I don't know how it got drafted, to study what makes a research university great. And of course, we went over all quantitative measures about dollars per faculty, space, and you look at all the numbers and all the rankings and everything. Then we also got a report from a similar study done by UCLA a year before. Once you read that report, you could easily say that report really should have been titled, What UCSD is Doing That We Are Not. And our report also had come to that point. So I was already scratching my head as a part of this study, what is this rocket that is propelling UCSD? I saw that rocket sitting in front of me. And so when Bob called me a year later to come and join UCSD, because we were putting together a big initiative here where the war room, 24/7 operation of the proposal was here in UCSD, I would drive down. I was ready. To me, that experience to today, Cal IT 2, led to a vision, and Cal IT 2 to us is what CERN is to a physicist. It's the giant playroom for the computer scientist in all areas that we deal with. And Bob's words have defined our collective aspirations. We, in our faculty meetings, somebody will say, remember what Bob said? There was only one Bob. Quality, impact, recognition. Those 3 words still are repeated in our faculty. Don't do what a top 5 department would not do. So these words meant a lot. So what I want to do is in the next few minutes, show you, Bob, that the seeds you planted, how it has grown, and the mothership, the computer science right across, where it is going. And I'll find some way to flip the slides. I actually never figured this out. Oh, here. So this is looking at you. I had to call it kiddo because I didn't want to have copyright violations. National Academy of Engineering does a lot of work about these grand challenges of engineering, all of engineering. And if you look at those engineering challenges, there are 14 of them. At least 6 of them are predicated on advances in computer science. In fact, computer is the least inspiring device or least motivating device for our researchers. There are more papers written by our faculty or computer scientists on integrity of ballot than by political scientists, or security, or privacy, or even healthcare. So computer science is expanding both intellectually up as well as broadening. And as we do that, we are beginning to talk about computer science or computing in social sciences, in arts, in media, in pretty much all domains. So as this field permeates, we are having to ask our questions. How do all our disciplines come together? Where does UCSD stand in this? So what I've done is, if you think of computer science in a broad manner, it really is about systems, whether they are planetary scale or nanoscale, whether they are healthcare or societal scale. All of those are covered. It is not a wonder that an institute that was designed for telecommunications and computing is actually having healthcare and arts and media as a part of its portfolio, as a part of its interaction. So if you look at this, we are at a juncture where computer science is now discovering new intellectual challenges from these areas. I'm sorry. And as we do that, computer science department is only 25 years old. In fact, this year will be 25th year anniversary. We have graduated 5,504 students. I have looked at the list of entire list in the last 2 years. I've studied it carefully. Where our graduates have gone, and where are they engaged. We are known for UCSD Pascal, but now we are known for many, many more things that you're beginning to see that. And I've listed them all on one side. We are the only university in the nation to actually have the license to spam, because we research spam, or take control of a vehicle remotely, for example, and so on. So from these beginnings, from UCSD Pascals, to now be creating infrastructure projects that are much, much more interdisciplinary team efforts. In just last year alone, each of these is at least $10 million effort. Expeditions or mass spectrometry. In fact, there's one I just forgot to mention about Terra Clouds and Swarms Cloud from DARPA, or a new frontier in cybersecurity. So when you look at this, UCSD is in the lead of an organizational of very large scale efforts that span across universities, whether they are in the mass spectrometry, the only center in computer science in the computer science department by NIH, or in expeditions or frontiers projects. As we look at all these things, we are beginning to create not only impact but also recognition. As we do that, and as we rise, our educational mission is transforming. And here is how. We are probably the largest computer science department in the nation. I say probably because I have not bothered to study that. We are almost likely that we are. We are 3 times the size of Georgia Tech College of Computing. We are 1/3, more than 1/3 of the Jacobs School of Engineering. These are our just undergraduate measures, 2,247 in fall of this year. So when you look at it, we have created a mission for ourselves as we go to the education mission, that our students be able to dig deeper, be practical and practiced in small projects, in small groups, in labs, and above all, be inspired to do good. Just like Google, do no harm. Well, we actually are creating a generation of individuals and training talent, 2,000 of those in a few years, that will actually go out and change the society. So it is my pleasure, actually, this is the first time I'm going to show this image publicly. This I've shown it to my potential donors in the past. We are creating a space purely for interaction. This is a cutaway of the computer science building. And we're creating a new area that will host a whole bunch of competition, project teams, and so on. In fact, this is how it will look like. And these are some of the renderings by the artist, where we're creating space with large number of labs, the number of sponsors who have actually lined up to put their names onto the rooms and spaces and galleries and so on. That will allow our undergraduates to be a part of our larger research infrastructure. All of that is happening as we're creating talent that is just compelling. Let me give you one example of a talent. This is a student in our department, his name is Elliot Crow. And he took a project with one of our faculty members, Yo Friend, to just look for parking spot a very crying need on this campus. And so he said, okay, I'm going to put a camera on a balloon and float it up in the sky. Well, when the balloon goes up on the sky and the camera, it is shaking like this on the wind. So you can't really identify anything. And he works with your Fryan to actually write programs that stabilize the video, and what you see is edges moving. And he actually made the system work. He said, well, if I can find parking, I can actually do more than that. And he went down to find a company called Get Around. He's the technical lead for that company. He founded the company. Now you can rent a Prius or a Tesla with the stuff that he built that goes into that car. We are creating talent that will create businesses, that will create enterprises for tomorrow. Our research also spans all across the place. This is me, I guess, with a few more pounds on me, doing sensors on a bridge. So it's a department that is growing, reaching out, and all of that has been possible from the seeds that Bob, you sowed. And so on behalf of all of us in Computer Science Department, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you, Bob, for the foundations that you've done to encourage us to dig deeper, be practical and practiced, and above all, be inspired. Happy birthday, Bob.
So we've heard a great deal about the views of Bob's academic colleagues. We thought we would switch to somebody who also shared an important role in building the vision of the Jacob School. Tom Dillon is the retired Senior Vice President of SAIC, who really was key to the building of the industry associates of the school. Tom.
Bob, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years. You know, it just seems like a few weeks. I wanted to make sure we had a picture of Dick Atkinson with Bob to start this talk off, because what I'm going to tell you is nothing that hasn't been said 4 or 5 times already. But I'm going to say it from the point of view of somebody from industry who watches this thing from a management perspective that's maybe more prevalent in industry. And I was very blessed when I came to San Diego in 1984 that General Atomics and later SAIC gave me the privilege of being a liaison with UCSD. And as part of that, I got to know Dick Atkinson. And Dick, as he said this morning, made it clear that a key part in his strategy to grow the greatness of UCSD was industrial partnerships. And of course, when you hear that kind of stuff, you all often wonder, is this for real or not? And Dick really walked that talk. It was clear it was really important to him. Everything he did reflected that importance. And so my talk really could be summed up in just a few words, and that is the highest praise I could give you, Bob, is to say, you're just like Dick Atkinson. And it's honest to God, when I was reflecting back on the first few months as you were dean, that's what I was thinking. It was clear to me that just like Dick Atkinson, you had a very clear, passionate vision of where you wanted the Division of Engineering or the School of Engineering to go. It was able to articulate that, and more importantly, you were able to infect other people with it. I never felt it was your vision. I felt it was our vision. I felt that the industry community was engaged in that vision, and that's critical because I know you were doing the same thing with the faculty. You got the faculty on board with the vision. You got the administration on board with the vision. That was all critical. And then finally, you got the philanthropists on board with the vision. And that's what made it so successful. But in addition, you had the same clarity of a plan of how to get from here to there. And what everybody else has pointed out is clear that that plan was a dynamic plan. It was an opportunistic plan. But everybody understood the vision every step of the way. And when the plan changed, everybody understood the change. That's incredibly important, and I think that is a huge part of why you were so successful. But lastly, from a management point of view, visions and plans are really important to success.
but excellence of implementation is a fundamental key, particularly to succeed at the level that you wanted to succeed. And that was clear. I mean, you built a staff in your office to help you support accomplishing the vision and carrying out that plan. And to this day, people like Linda and Lindsay, they're still remembering those days with great affection and nostalgia. And I think that was a critical part. Your own personal, passionate commitment to this. I mean, to say that you pursued this with exuberance is an understatement. And that exuberance is what was so infectious, and it made a tremendous difference. So I'm going to go quickly through this, but in terms of the outreach to industry, it was so obviously sincere. Both, just like Dick Atkinson, Bob Conn really meant it. And his approach, his first approach, was to really transform the industrial affiliates program. And you can see when Bob came, we were, we had about 17 members, and very shortly he built that up to 64. But more importantly, the commitment was much higher. I think when we started, the commitment was about 5,000 per company, and Bob quickly moved it to 25,000. Well, it's not just because he's such a handsome guy. Bob was committed to making sure that the affiliates program delivered value to the industry partners. And that approach was really what sold it. But it also gave Bob an opportunity to get input from the industrial community. I think the industrial affiliates program became an important way for Bob to listen. And we all know that's one of many things that he does so well. Can I have the next slide? There's more. We've heard this before, but these are some of the things that were industrial relevant that I think the ideas had come out of some of the meetings that we had in the industrial affiliates meetings, but became tangible in bigger elements. The first was the Center for Wireless Communication. I think that got started in something like 1995. So very early on, Bob realized that we wanted to have a focus for this. The Von Liebig Entrepreneurial Center was another thing that came out. Bob was able to get a $10 million startup grant for this. This is something that to this day remains an important part of the culture that's being built here in the University of the 21st century. And one thing was very impressed with was Endowed chairs sponsored by industry. My company, SAIC, was a great company, but its hallmark wasn't generosity in terms of that. And for Bob to be able to get not one but two endowed chairs from SAIC, that alone is a tribute to his greatness. And I think if you ever wanted to get further proof, you wouldn't have to go any further than that. Well, it's time for me to wrap up, Bob, but I know, just like Dick Atkinson, if I were to congratulate you on the success of your plan and your objective, I think you'd be disappointed and you'd scold me, because it's our plan, our objective. We all owned it. We all felt the sense of pride as it came to a success. But I want to make sure that you understand that everybody clearly understands that it was your leadership that made it happen, that it was your leadership that made us all own this wonderful thing. And I think that this is something that I believe we're all committed to keeping growing and renewing in the foreseeable future. And it is also my hope that many years down the road that people will remember that time from 1994 to 2002 when this miraculous transformation occurred. So thank you very much for everything, Bob.
We earlier heard Irwin Jacobs talk about Bob and Ann's vision as art collectors and their uncanny ability to spot emerging talent. We have, as part of the UCSD community, a real leader in this particular field. Mary Beebe is our director of UCSD's Stuart collection, which is certainly one of the prides of the campus. Mary.
Thank you, Peter. I'm not used to speaking at colloquiums for engineers and scientists. But then Bob Conn is an accomplished engineer and a man of science, and then some, as we've all heard this morning, and then some. He's just, I'm in the then some part. He is a true Renaissance man. I assume that you've all noticed that there's an art gallery here in this building that originally had more space than I think the visual arts department had altogether. That's thanks to Bob. He and Ann are strong supporters of the music scene in San Diego, as you probably know, the theater and the arts. And as director of the Stuart Collection of Contemporary Art, Bob has been truly a significant colleague and friend. I say this in addition to having put together one of the most adventurous, if people have said, and daring contemporary art collections in San Diego, he's been a spectacular and brave supporter of the Stuart Collection. Their collection at their home is pushing all the boundaries. It's really an amazing, amazing wonderful contribution to this community that you can go to see that. The things on their walls are way ahead of their time, they purchased way ahead of their time. And that's, of course, what we try to do at the Stuart Collection, and some of that has been made possible by Bob. He's been a great mentor, supporter, and confidant in many ways. Like everyone else, I'm very honored to have the chance here to thank you, and in front of all these people who know and admire you so greatly. Actually, all of the deans of engineering at UCSD have been very good to the Stuart Collection. In 1988, Lee Rudy said, you probably know that Lee Rudy said that he was very enthusiastic about having the vices and virtues on the Charles Powell Structures Lab. He said, yes, the vices and virtues are just as important as engineering. They're the pillars of our world, which was pretty great because we'd run into a lot of trouble, or maybe not trouble, but challenge, because Bruce Nauman had first proposed that work for the Mandel Weiss Theater. And I don't know how many of you were here. It was back in the early 80s. And Dick Atkinson was sort of put upon by a lot of neighbors. I have a file of letters written to him saying no neon in our neighborhood that are quite remarkable. So he said to me, Mary, won't you please, hold back? Can't you just, and I said, for a little bit, but this is too important an artist and too important a work. So when Lee Rudy said, go for it on the Powell Structures Lab, we were thrilled. And Frieder Seibel has been really supportive of the Tim Hawkinson Bear. He was the one that said at the opening, as everybody here has said today, art and engineering have a lot in common. You have to have a great idea in the beginning, and then you have to figure out how to make it work. So that's, another sort of connection that has been pointed out over and over again today, but between art and engineering. Bob has not only been supportive of all the works in the collection, he's actually suggested some wonderful artists. He and Ann have several Tim Hawkinson works in their collection, and that really helped inspire us to ask Tim for a proposal. The outcome was, of course, Bear, but had there not been Bob, there might not be Bear. We were really inspired by the work and introduced to Tim really by Bob. But a true test came in 1998 when he was appointed chair of a committee to evaluate the Stuart Collection. the faculty campus committee was formed to assess the value, if any, of the Stuart collection to the university and to recommend its continuation or its end. That was 98. There was an idea floating around that perhaps with the death of the founder patron, James Stuart de Silva, that maybe that should be it. Maybe what was there already should represent his legacy. And Jim had the original idea for the collection and really had underwritten the early works, but we had run out of his money. His vision was, of course, that there had to be Michelangelos living today, and our job was to go out and find them. And we, done our best. But under Bob's leadership, astute and wise as he is, and as supportive as he is, this committee's conclusion, after many interviews, and much thought, and I'm sure some controversy or some negative input. I mean, the idea of putting art on the campus is frivolous to some. Art is often the frosting instead of the cake. It's what you do after you've done everything else. But Bob really felt strongly, as he has indicated or led his life, that art is an important part of our experience in the world. And this committee came to the conclusion that, quote, this distinguished and distinguishing collection represents an important resource to the UCSD faculty, students, and staff, and we believe it must continue to grow to remain vital and contemporary. So that was a real push forward and a reason that we're still around. Everybody knows that if you don't grow, you kind of die. But Bob got that, and he knew it, and he set us up to go on our way and keep trying to bring sculptures to the campus. And I think not only the Stuart collection, but our entire UCSD community and more generations of students to come owe Bob a great debt. The newest piece is the Stuart collection, as you probably know, is the de Hosa's Fallen Star, the house on the Jacobs Hall, built in the middle in the middle of the engineering complex. It looks like it sort of crash landed up there. It's created a huge expansion of our audience worldwide. But there was some nervousness in the beginning. I mean, the idea of crashing a house into a building was kind of crazy, and there were nervous people about, including Irwin Jacobs, who was just wasn't too sure. And so I went to Bob. I knew who to call for wisdom, and informed by both the seriousness of engineering and the value of art. And Bob said, it won't make the building funny, it will make it famous. Well, I said that to Irwin. I repeated those words and said, Irwin, it's not going to look silly. It's going to be famous. It's going to make and indeed it has. The images of it went viral all over the place. And when I get a call from a European or a Taiwanese or somebody, or a photo from a Korean newspaper halfway around the world, I think of Bob and thank him. There's one piece in the Stuart collection, too, that's worth mentioning here, because I think it sums up the timeless mission of the university that shines brightly even in today's world. John Baldessari's work at the entrance of the library is just 4 words: read, write, think, dream. It's the name of the work. But of course, if John had gotten to know Bob as he worked through the concept of that piece, it might read a little differently today, in accord with the many proficiencies of Bob Conn. It might say, read, write, think, dream, and then some. So then some, thank you for your then some, Bob Conn. We really, really appreciate your intelligence, your wisdom, your enthusiasm, and your spirit for supporting the arts.
So the last speaker on our program today is Nick Spitzer, who is, of course, the director of the Kavli Institute for Brain and Mind here at UCSD. He's a distinguished professor of neurobiology and their newest member of the National Academies of Sciences. Nick, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here today and to acknowledge Bob's many contributions. And I want to talk principally about his energy and his accomplishments and his impact in the count them four distinct careers that we've heard about. I think one thing that hasn't really been mentioned yet is something that I find very impressive about Bob. It's that here now, as president of the Kavli Foundation, he has the energy and the vision that I think he brought to Wisconsin, to Madison, Wisconsin, many years ago. He's undimmed by the passage of time. Many people in Bob's age bracket are thinking about retiring, about perhaps winding down at this point. And it's very clear that Bob is just winding up. So I thought I should say how I met Bob. We're all acknowledging that. And this was in 1993, Bob, when you first visited the campus. So that's now 20 years ago, not as long as some of you, but a good period of time. I was vice chair of the Academic Senate at that time. And during Bob's first year, in 94 and 95, I was the Senate chair. And it was a wonderful opportunity to work closely with Bob as dean and I as Senate chair, to see him in action, to partner with him, and to accomplish things that I think were important at that time. And I say this because even though I am a Senate guy, the Academic Senate at UC San Diego can be ponderous and glacial in its pace. Some of you may have experienced this. And Bob was a man of action, a man on the move. He didn't waste any time. He was up and running. And he reminded me of an algorithm that I learned from my grandfather years ago. Plan your work and work your plan. And Bob was the man doing this. So we've heard about his many contributions here in UC San Diego, following, of course, a very distinguished career in plasma physics. And as we've discussed already, when Bob left in 2002, he became a managing director of enterprise partners in the venture capital world. This was a very exciting time, I think, up until 2008. But it was really in 2009 that his current passion emerged when he became president of the Kavli Foundation. Fred Kavli, as I think you all know, was born and raised and schooled in Norway, came to this country with a degree in physics, founded a company, made sensors for automobiles, trains, planes, rockets, was quite successful. And in 2000, folded his tent and set up the Kavli Foundation. And the Kavli Foundation is perhaps been best known in the past for two things. One, the scientific prizes, which are awarded every other year, $1 million prizes in each of three areas. Cosmology or theoretical astrophysics is one, nanoscience a second, and my own field, neuroscience, a third. And these have really, I think, captured the public imagination. These are fields that are not awarded Nobel Prizes. And so this is a significant activity of the Kavli Foundation. But then in addition, there are the Kavli Institutes. As you know, we have one here. I have the good fortune, as Peter said, to be the director of the Kavli Institute for Brain and Mind. But there are now 16 of these institutes distributed around the world, 8 in astrophysics and theoretical physics, 4 in nanoscience, and then 4 in neuroscience. When Bob took the helm of the Kavli Foundation, many of these had already been established, but Bob lost no time in working with Fred to establish further institutes and to further enhancing the visibility and the impact and the thrust of the Kavli prizes. So this was really all quite impressive. And I think a natural thing to do, taking on the leadership of this important global foundation. But in addition to this, of course, Bob, as we've heard, comes in, has a vision, which he's very clear about, and then plans his work and works his plan. And he, I think, has done an amazing job in the last 2 years, perhaps even just 18 months, accomplishing something that I think, as Terry Sejnowski mentioned last night, will be a legacy not only for the century, but possibly for the millennium. You've heard now about the BRAIN initiative, the BRAIN research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies, a nicely worded acronym here, a presidential initiative to revolutionize our understanding of the brain and how it functions to do the many things that it does for us. As Terry pointed out, previous efforts to try to capture the imagination of the funding agencies of the federal government have been going on for many years and have largely been a failure. And I think a large part of that was that they were across the board efforts to raise all boats. It's not very sexy, not very appealing. It didn't really capture the imagination. And Bob, with his colleagues at the Cowhey Foundation, saw that there was a wonderful opportunity now, at this point in the 21st century, to bring together two of the thrusts of the Cowhey Foundation to combine nanoscience and really engineering with neuroscience and to see the opportunity to bring these two together to launch a major effort. And the problem, as you've heard, is that the kinds of work that we've done over the past years, and I've contributed to this, looking at the activity of neurons, it's mostly one at a time. If we're really good, we can record from maybe 100 neurons at a time. But of course, there are 100 billion neurons in the brain, and this one at a time basis is going to be a very slow process. So how to solve this problem? Build some new tools. Bob saw the importance of this and got the ball rolling, sponsoring a meeting at the Cowhey Royal Society International Center. It's a wonderful English estate in Chicheley in England, and brought together the neuroscientists and the engineers, and stirred well, and got questions and going back and forth between the two of them. Ralph Greenspan, here today, was there at that meeting. I was not, unfortunately. And this led to a white paper. It led on to publications in seminal scientific journals. Terry got very much involved here. And a critical feature of this, then, was, again, Bob's visionary instinct. You have to know where to go and whom to talk to make this happen. And he and his colleagues connected with Tom Khalil in the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. And Bob, as we've heard before, had the right instinct here, the right vision. Let's find out what they want, and then let's give it to them. And it turned out that the president and his colleagues were looking for a grand challenge, something to inspire the people of the country, something that would also be a kind of innovative investment in the country that would generate jobs. We remember that the Human Genome Project involved an investment of about $3 billion, and it generated about $800 billion in economic activity. So something like the Human Genome Project would be, in principle, the right thing to do. So Ralph and Terry and their colleagues proposed the brain activity mapping project, mapping the activity between thousands and indeed millions of neurons in the brain simultaneously. And this seemed very exciting. And notice now that this was not an across-the-board effort to raise funding for all research, but to drive down a track that was attractive. Republicans have brains, Democrats have brains. Those brains are aging, probably at equal rates for the two parties. And so being able to understand how the brain worked and possibly to do something about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other disorders that we know too much about, it seemed like a great idea. So the hook was in. This was going to be the grand challenge that would be, in fact, #1. And the rest is history, I think. You've read about this on April 2nd, thanks to the work that Bob did to lay the ground and inspire the enthusiasm. Bob and colleagues from the Cowhey Foundation, as well as Ralph and Terry and I and Pradeep, Khosla and others were in the East Room of the White House for this fantastic event. Francis Collins introduced Barack Obama as our scientist in chief, which brought a huge smile to the president's face. And he laid out the BRAIN initiative for us. So I think during this time, Bob has made more visits to the White House than any 3 or 5 of us will do in a lifetime. I think he's getting a well-worn carpet there every time he comes to the door. And I'm sure that it's far from over at this point. We see here some of the themes that we've talked about during these wonderful 2 days. Themes that showed up, of course, in Madison and at UCLA in Bob's physics career. Themes that showed up again when he was dean here at the school. I'm sure they were well represented when he was a managing director at Enterprise Partners. Bob has, once again, built teams of people to accomplish things that no one person could accomplish alone. He's nurtured great science. I think the BRAIN initiative is going to turn out some of the most amazing science that we'll be privileged to witness in our lifetimes. He's been, as we've just recently discussed, more than visionary. He's gone beyond being visionary to develop these ideas. And as George Tynan pointed out yesterday evening, all of this really in the service of the larger service of humanity, so that there are the immediate goals and the immediate objectives, and then there are these much larger, very important societal goals. So I think the question is, what's next? This is Bob's 4th career. And as I've said, he's not letting up. I can't predict how long Bob will remain as president of the Cowhey Foundation. I hope it's a long time as a director of one of the Cowhey Institutes. It's great to have him there, but it would not surprise me at some point if he went on to careers 5 and 6. I was delighted to learn yesterday, Bob, that your mother is 98. Now, that tells us a lot, friends. That tells us good genes and long lives in this family. So remember that 70 is the new 50. So there's a lot of miles left to go here. Bob's career has been one of continuing creativity and achievement, and I'm confident that this will run for further decades into the future. Congratulations, Bob, and happy birthday.
Well, we now wrestle with a fundamental managerial dilemma. Bob was also a believer in promptness in running meetings, and we are overtime. However, and I would like to give Bob the last word because he always does get it. And then I would, though, if there is a last tribute from the audience that somebody wants to offer, please. But I am going to stand here as the vigilant protector of the calendar.
So at the break, I was having a conversation with someone, and I observed that the success of UCSD and the great rise of UCSD and its place in academia and the world was due in large part, not exclusively, to an extraordinary level of cooperation at the leadership level of the university. And many people have credited Dick Atkinson with that today. I'd add Bob Dynes, Dave Miller, Dick Attia, Wayne Kennedy, Bruce Darling, and so on. And it's been a remarkable, selfless team all working to get the right things done, not to look out for their personal little slice of the pie. And I made this observation, and the person I was talking to said, "You ought to go up and make that observation at the open mic session." And I thought, well, this is really Bob's day. Why should I do that? The reason is it was Bob that I was talking to, and he suggested I come up and say that.
There is in the marketplace the invisible hand, and then there is in management the visible hand. And I now hand the stage over to the visible hand, Bob Conn.
Well, it's been a stunning morning, and I want to thank everybody who spoke. There were some comments about incessant and even more. And I got a gift yesterday from the very first postdoc that I had, Dai Z, back in 1971. He brought this gift. He said, "You'll understand it, Bob. It's truly you." I said, "Oh, gee, a gift. No. And he said, "Here it is. You should wear that." Of course I'm right. I'm Bob. So people know I can be intense. But I hope you got from almost everything other people said that it's always been in a good cause. At least I hope it has been. So I really want to begin with thank yous. Nothing happens without people. And I think I have believed in people, and I have tried very hard to give extraordinary people space to do the things that they have done. And I guess it's that. And one other thing that has been here, I am a deep believer in rising tides raise all the boats. And almost every story that got talked about here, that's the theme. If all the boats go up, your boat's going to go up too. And I don't care if it was the engineering initiative that ended up raising everybody else's boat, but by the way, our boat went up too. Or the Cal IT2 initiative, where sure, engineering's boat went up. It went up a lot, but everybody else's boat went up. And you just, if you think like that, even in the BRAIN initiative, we didn't try to own it. We brought in Lord Sainsbury's Foundation from Europe. We brought in the Allen Foundation from Seattle, Paul Allen's Brain Institute. We brought in later HHMI, obviously Salk. You can't lose. You just can't lose with that kind of an approach. So I am just appreciative that you sort of saw that. And it helped me work with you. Mostly it was a joy to work with you. You could see why from the comments that all of you made, whether it was an alumni like Greg or a colleague dean like Peter. It's been just a true pleasure. There are some people, though, this doesn't happen on its own, and I want to start by thanking. I want to make one other comment before I start with the thank yous. There's one person who it's extraordinarily painful that he's not here to speak. And I would have asked him had he been able. He passed away last month. Ed Freeman. Ed was, particularly after I got here, but throughout my career, talk about an invisible hand. Ed's was the invisible hand in so many ways, one of which I found out just yesterday, an invisible hand that made certain things happen. So he's not here with us, but I got to tell you, his spirit is at this place, and it is at this room, and it is in my heart. And that deserves to be said, needs to be said. The meeting. Well, people put this together, and I want to thank the three faculty who really put in extraordinary efforts. George Tynan, and a distinguished professor now in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department. We started out, he was the student, I was the mentor who said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That was a story he told yesterday, I'd forgotten, but it was a style, and he's done a fabulous job. Farah Najmabadi, where is Farah? Farah was my most distinguished postdoc, without question, and he went on, he is now a distinguished faculty member in electrical and computing engineering. He's also the director of that Center for Energy Research. Maybe I did have an eye for talent, because boy, did they represent that. And then Ramesh Rao, who is here. And I got Ramesh Rao involved in leadership early on, and he's just done a remarkable job for this campus and for Cal IT2 without question. He put a lot of time and energy in. And then the staff, they enabled the staff to do what you've seen the last 2 days, yesterday and today. Sasha, where are you? Sasha Dopold. I knew her father in the philosophy department. When I came down here in 93 and 94, I cared about that. And she's here. She did so much work. And then Doug Ramsey. Doug is usually in the corner. He may not be there now, from Cal IT2. He put together all of those mailings, all of that artwork. Oh, my goodness. Deneen came in from the School of Engineering and brought that kind of expertise on how to put on. I think Sasha said to me, this was the first, like the event yesterday, last night, the first time she put on a dinner. And Deneen had a lot of experience with that. She really, really helped. Thank you. And Johnny Nguyen, who made the rest of it happen. And there were other people, but I really have to say thank you to all of you. Deeply heartfelt, right? Because nothing like this happens on your own. Two more short things. This is being webcast, and then we'll get a DVD. And my family knows about it, both up north and back east. And so I do a shout out to my family, including my 98-year-old mother. She'll be 98 on June 5th. Sidebar is that when we met with President Obama prior to the announcement in the East Room. He met with 8 or 10 of us. And my vice president for science programs, Myung Chun, was there with me, so we had 2 people from the Catholic Foundation. But after we had the conversation, I turned to him, and it was the second time I'd seen him in 5 days. And I turned to him and I said, by the way, and I had talked to my mother the Sunday before, I said, by the way, my 98-year-old mother wanted me to tell you how much she supports you, how much she thinks you're doing the right thing. Now, that's her political persuasion. I think he got the message. This was a 98-year-old woman born in 1915 who said an African-American president was great. Imagine that change in a century. Fabulous. And he smiled, looked back, and said, oh, you have a wise mother. There was a lot of talk about focus and expanding boundaries, and have a goal, you have a vision, you're going to go there. But then every now and then you turn on a dime. Every now and then these boundaries go back and forth. My father had a saying, brings tears to my eyes. He said, you reach for the moon, and if you come up short, you'll be a hell of a lot further than you would be otherwise. And I never forgot that. So in everything, those expanding boundaries, that's a way of getting a little closer to the moon. Just a little closer to the moon. And that's always better than where you would have gotten to. An amazing philosophy with one line. Just reach for the moon. If you fall short, you'll be further than you would have been otherwise. And finally, through all these 20 years, there's been one person who's meant more to me than anything, and that's Ann. So through all these decisions and all these discussions, you know, it sounds like a freight train going down the track with no questions and no issues and sort of just this is the way it's going to work, right? It's all going to come out great in the end, and you just think about it, and you have all these strategies, and Shu and I worked on them. He talked about how that all worked, and you got to be flexible. Well, let me tell you, it is not like that. There is no straight line between 2 points. They are very variable, lots of rocks in the road, and you need somebody that you just deeply trust, who's deeply smart, deeply wise, maybe loves you too, but I don't know about that. And so Ann and I have, over all that time, been able to have conversations about these very difficult things that do make an impact. And she just did it 2 weeks ago. So I have another thing I'm doing. I'm always doing something, right? This is a coalition of foundations for science. And it involves Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Sloan Foundation, Moore Foundation, the Simons Foundation, Keck Foundation. But you know, it's the same story writ large, right? I go to a meeting, I say, I got this idea, what could we do? Bring the foundations together. So we went public with it at the AAAS meeting just a week and a half ago on a forum on science and policy in Washington. She sat for 2 hours with me on a Saturday at the kitchen table on the 2-page manuscript that was the basis of that talk. You'll be hearing more about that. It's going to make a difference for the country. The aim is to double philanthropic support for science over the coming decade. That can really move the needle. But every time something like this happened, and it's not always something big, I sit there and I say, what do you think? Oh, I think this. Oh, I think that. Prick the bubble. Make sure it doesn't get too inflated. Get it right. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? So I'm going on a little bit, but it's because it's made such a difference. So I want to thank you, Ann. Thank you. And with that, I thank all of you who stayed the morning and all the students and postdocs and people who came back yesterday. That was just remarkable. And dinner last night was just amazing. It's been a wonderful celebration. I don't wish I were 60 or 50. I do look ahead, and there's more to come, I hope. But in any case, thank you all. It's so great to see you again. And now lunch, right? And now lunch. Thank you.